All right, good day. Hope that you're doing well. So in this video, we're going to be looking into questions relating to Euclidean geometry. We're going to be solving angles, right? Angles on a straight line, angles in a triangle, and as well as your parallelogram questions. All right. But for now, let us start with the first question, 3.1. Determine with suitable reasons the size of unknown angles in the given diagram. Now, on this diagram that we're given here, the only unknown is angle T, right? So let me just try and highlight angle T. So this is the angle that is unknown, which is angle T. But if you look very close, right, can you see that 225 and 76 plus T, these are angles around a point, right? As a result, what do we know about angles around the point? Angles around the point, they add up to 360. So when you add all these angles, you're going to expect to get 360. And your reason is going to be angles around the point. Now, we can solve for our value of T. Now, when I add 225 with 76, I expect to get 301, right? So 301 plus T, this is equals to 360. So I'm going to check this to the other side and it's going to become a negative. As a result, T, it's going to be equals to 360 minus 301. And your value of T is going to be equals to 59. So now remember, every time whenever you're given parallel lines, right, you need to try and identify these shapes. So let me first start with this. I call this the fan shape. If this line, right, it's parallel to that line, therefore, this angle right over here is going to be equals to that angle. And your reason would be corresponding angles. Now, on the other side, when this line is parallel to that line, simply means that when you add these two angles here, so let me name this angle Y as well as angle X. When you take Y, you add it to X. These two should be equals to 180. And your reason would be co-interior angles. Now here, this is your N or your Z shape. If this line is parallel to that line, therefore, this angle right over here is going to be equals to that angle. And your reason would be alternating angles. So every time whenever you have parallel line, try to identify one of these shapes. 90% of the time, you're going to make use of these shapes to find your angles on your given diagram. Now, all right, so now in 3.2, they're telling us that in the diagram below, GH is parallel to JK. So first, let us try and solve for these following values, right? So we can start with A or B, any of the two. I want you to try and pause the video and try to identify any of these shapes, right? Remember your parallel lines, right? These lines should be parallel. Now, try to identify any of these shapes to try to solve for the angles that are unknown. Now, if I were to starting off with A, right? With A, I can identify my F shape. So my F goes like that, and it extends to that. All right. Now, remember, we said this here is going to be equals to that if these two lines are parallel, of which in this instance, yes, we have these two lines which are parallel to one another, right? So here, first thing first, I'm going to say, okay, my A, it is equals to 120, right? And my reason would be corresponding angles. Remember, for your F, you use your corresponding angles. Corresponding angles. And you need to name those lines that are parallel to one another. In this instance, you see your GH is parallel to your JK, and we were given that, right? So you need to also mention that GH it's parallel to JK. Always mention those parallel lines, right? So now let us try and solve for the next value, which is B. Now, also try to pause and identify the shape that you could use in order to solve for your value of B. Now, remember, this line it still extends here, right? So it's going to be parallel to that. Now, if I were to identify the shape that B forms, remember, I'm trying to use the angles that I'm given, right? In this instance, I'm going to try and use my angle F, which is 135. So always try to use the angles that you're given and try to identify one of those shapes. Now, if you note, the type of shape that is being formed here is your U, right? To be specific, the shape here. And what do we know about these two angles? Meaning, So if you take angle B and add it to 135, we expect to get 180. And your reason would be co-interior angles. All right, now let us name our parallel lines also, right? So let me just name my parallel lines. So our parallel lines are still the same, it's still GH as well as JK. Now, solving for my value of B is going to be equals to 180 minus 135, which is equals to 45 degrees. Now, our angle B is going to be equals to 45, and our A, we solve for it to be 120. And that'll be all for this question. Now, remember, every time whenever you have parallel lines, try to identify these shapes and try to use your given to solve using your fun shape, right? Now, let's move on to the next question. So in the next question here, we need to determine the size of x as well as y. Now, if I can start with my x value, can you see that my x is vertically opposite to this 32 degrees? And what do we know about vertically opposite angles? We know that angles that are vertically opposite to one another, they're going to be equal to one another, right? So x is equals to 32 degrees, and my reason is vertically opposite angles. All right, now I know that my x is 32. Now, can you be able to find your y now that you have your x? Yes, right? Remember, this is on a Cartesian plane. This here, if I were to highlight this line, so can you see that the angle that is being formed there, it's 90 degrees, right? So this angle here, when you take your x as well as your y, you add them together, they're going to be equals to 90. Because also this other side, we were told that this is 90, right? So this is the first point that I'm going to mention, that when I take my y and I add it to x, this is equals to 90. And you can say angles on a straight line, because this angle here is also 90. And remember, when you add angles on a straight line, they should be equals to 180, right? So here you can say angles on a straight line. Now, you have your x, which is 32. You can now solve for your value of y. And your y is going to be 90 minus 32. And punching that into your calculator, your y should be equals to 58 degrees. All right. Now, let us move on to the next question now. With regards to the next question, we have a triangle, right? And we need to solve for our value of x as well as our value of y. Now, we're being told that AB is parallel to line CD. Now, every time whenever you have parallel lines, try to identify your fan shape. Now let us see if we could use our fan shape to try and solve for one of these angles, right? You can try and pause the video and try to solve for one of these. If I were to identify the shape that is my parallel line forms, it is my Z shape, right? So this is the Z shape that is formed by my parallel lines. And as a result, I know that it has to be equals to that. Reason being alternating angle. So this is the first point that I'm going to mention. So my angle Y is going to be equals to 47 degrees, alternating angles. And I need to mention my parallel lines. AB is parallel to CB. Right. Now, my Y is 47. Now, I want you to note something. Look at your angle X. What is your angle X? Angle X is your exterior angle of a triangle. Now remember, whenever you have an exterior angle of a triangle, this is always going to be equals to two opposite interior angles. So if I were to draw a rough sketch here, let's say you have something like this, and this is your exterior angle. Now we see that this exterior angle of a triangle is always equals to two opposite interior angles of your triangle. So when you add these two angles, they're going to be equals to your exterior angle. You exclude this angle here that is attached to your exterior angle. Now trying to use the same concept here, can you see that our angle X is going to be equals to these two opposite interior angles, right? So here I'm going to say X, it is equals to 79 plus 47, 47, and why is that? It's an exterior angle of a triangle. Now, as a result, my value of X is going to be equals to 126. All right. And that'll be all for this question. Now, moving on to the next question, we are still on triangles. Now, 3.5, in the diagram below, they're telling us that RQ is equals to PQ, right? Basically, these two lines are equal to one another. Now, can you see the type of triangle that is being formed here? Now, this triangle that is being formed is your isosceles triangle, right? And what are the properties of your isosceles triangle? So I'm going to try and draw it here. Now, we know that these are equal to one another as we are given here. And what is the other property that we know with regards to your isosceles triangle? Base angles are going to be equal to one another. So this angle here is going to be equal to that angle there, right? So as a result, this is the first point I'm going to mention. My angle P is going to be equal to my angle R, meaning that this is going to be 3y. So here I'm going to say, okay, my angle R is equal to my angle P, right? And why is that? Opposite angles, equal sides, right? This is an isosceles triangle. So as a result, my angle R, it's going to be equals to 3y. Now, I need to determine my value of y. Now, what is the most important property of your triangle that you do? You know that sum of all your angles inside your triangle, they should add up to 180, meaning that if I take my angle R and I add it to my angle P as well as angle Q, I expect to get 180. And why is that? Sum of angles in a triangle. Now, substituting my values, right? So I'm going to do my workings here on this side. My angle R is 3y. My angle P is 3y also, plus my angle Q, which is y plus 47. And all this is equals to 180. Now here I'm going to group like terms, right? These are like terms. And I'm going to take that to the other side, group it with its like term. So 3y plus 3y, this is 6y plus another y, which is the same as 1y. This is going to make 7y. Now, on the other side, 180 minus 47, this is going to be equals to 133. And because I'm looking for my y, and this y is multiplied to the 7, I'm going to remove the 7 by doing the opposite of what it does, which is dividing, right? Because it was multiplying. And what I do on the left, I must also do on the right. So as a result, my value of y is going to be equals to 133 divided by 7, which is equals to 19. Now, moving on to the last question, which I want us to look into here, ABCD, it's a parallelogram. Now, you need to know the properties of your parallelogram. Now, what do we know about the properties of a parallelogram? We know that opposite lines are parallel to one another, right? So this here is going to be parallel with that. And we also know that these are going to be equal to one another. Your opposite lines are going to be equal to one another. So the first one we could try and determine here is x, right? So x, it will be easy to determine it because can you see that x is on the same line with your 52, right? So basically here I'm going to say, okay, if I take my angle x and I add it to 52, I expect to get 180. And why is that? These are angles on a straight line, and angles on a straight line, they need to add up to 180. So now as a result, my x is going to be taking the 52 to the other side, is going to be equal to 180 minus 52, which is equals to 128. So I know that this angle is 128. Now, what is the other most important properties with regards to your parallelogram that you know? Opposite angles of your parallelogram are equal to one another, right? So this y is going to be equals to angle x, as well as this angle b here is going to be equals to angle d. So which is why it's important for you to be able to know the properties of your parallelogram, right? So now I know that, okay, my angle y and my angle x are going to be equal to one another. And my reason is that these are opposite angles of a parallelogram. Now, as a result, my y is also going to be equals to 128. And that will be all for this video.